guys, in this video I want to talk a little bit about trying to get a straight cut with this guillotine machine, and based on some recent research and quite a few test cuts, situations where cutting with this machine might give you getting a straight cut with this machine might give you the best results. I am in no way a professional using this machine. I just use it for my own personal use. But since putting out some of these videos, I just try to help if I think I can when people leave comments and questions in the comment section. Alright? Okay, so I did a bit of research on guillotine machines, how guillotine machines functions, blades, the bevel of the blade, if that bevel of the blade, if it can affect the how strong that blade is and the type of cut it is able to produce. And I also went back and read quite a few of the comments and suggestions that have been left under these videos over the last couple months, right? And trying to put all that together, I hope some of that is able to help those that are having issues right now. All right, so I do want to answer a question first, and that was why when I cut off the spine, why it is I don't just recut it afterwards, which is a really excellent question. Now, I put out a video a couple months ago on what I do to try to improve the angle of the cut, and that is based mostly on how I use the machine. Like 95% of the times when I'm using this machine, my intention is just to cut off the initial spine and then to go back with a coil, a binding machine, a coil binding machine, and add a spiral coil. Because of that, I need to take into consideration whatever margin space that book has, because I only have that amount of space to work with to cut off the spine and then have enough space to then go back and add that coil. So my solution was just making sure that on the side close to the plastic fence, my book was, all of the pages was straight up against that fence as much as possible, holding down my stack and then giving it as clean of a cut as possible, right? Now, what I have found over the time of using this machine is that if I'm cutting into something really small, that off cut to the side is usually minimal. But if I am cutting into something big, then I would get that 3 to 4 millimeter that someone recently mentioned they are getting when they are cutting into whatever it is they are cutting into. All right. So when I looked into the blade, now on that topic of blades, as I said, I am not a professional, but I did find some information that said that the bevel of that blade, it can affect the cut, the strength of the blade, but also the cut. But anything further than that, I would probably refrain from saying, since, as I said, I'm no professional in that area. But what I did do was I measured the thickness of the top part of that bevel, right? I measured the thickness of it where the piece of steel starts to bevel into that edge that forms the blade. The top part of that bevel measures about 4 millimeters in thickness. Then I also measured the height of that bevel, and of that edge, I should say. And the height of that edge is about ½ an inch in height. So when I think about that, and I think about from a woodworking perspective, because my husband does a bit of woodworking, so I had a discussion with him. Plus, I looked at a video on YouTube that was really helpful as well, and I'll link that one below. When taking all of that into consideration, I am of the mindset of thinking that when I initially cut into the spine, that 3 to 4 millimeter off cut that I'm getting, because it seems to be consistent, I'm thinking that that might be an initial reflection of the bevel of the blade, since it's the same 4 millimeters in width, right? Because the smaller the books that I'm cutting into, I noticed that that off cut becomes smaller and smaller, which seems to line up with the angle of that blade. Now, to be honest, I don't know the exact angle of this blade, but the angle of that bevel or that edge does affect the cut. All right. with regards to cutting it a second time, I did get some stuff that I could afford to, maybe cut into the words. And when you recut it, you are able to improve that cut, which takes me back to a comment that someone had left a couple months ago, that maybe there was also some slippage happening when the blade cuts into the spine because of the glue. And I am thinking that that is probably correct as well, because when I recut this book, I cut off the spine and then I recut it, and I'm still getting that slant. However, it is much better than the initial cut. What I have found to give the best result, or the straightest cut, is when you stick to that 1/2 inch and below, which seems to go in line with the height of the actual edge of the blade. That's about 1/2 inch, and I've noticed that even with this book here, once you cross that 1/2 inch mark, that's when it starts to slowly start to slant out to the top, and I've found that to be consistent. So based on all of that information, it is my assumption that if you were using this in a professional manner, anything about 1/2 inch and lower, or smaller I should say, seems to give you a better chance of getting a straight cut. Anything above that, it seems to consistently give this slant at the top. A few more things. The reason why I have these rubber bands here, I have found from an experience I've had before, when you are trying to recut the book, if you don't use something to keep the book in place, when you cut off the initial spine, what you will find is that when you're trying to shift everything towards the blade, unless you gingerly move it in the direction towards the blade, then you have this side, the pages on this side start to shift out of alignment. So it makes it really difficult to try to perfect the cut, because I have found it almost impossible to try to get everything lined back up perfectly on this side, even when I separate it and try to knock everything in place, unless you was cutting into something really small. Another thing I wanted to mention is I did try at one time separating the book into sections, smaller sections, and cutting the edges that way. Now for me, where perfection is not absolutely important, that's not the worst thing. But what I have found is that when you separate it into sections, you might end up with a straight enough cut on this side. However, whether it be because of just human error or a little bit of parallax error, it just does not give you a flush, edge on the opposite side. All right, so when you are recutting, you do want to use some rubber bands or Velcro strap or something to keep everything in place from shifting. All right, the last thing I wanted to mention before I wrap up this video is someone asked about if there is a bolt or something that you can use to or adjust, to possibly change the angle of the blade. And after reopening up my machine and looking inside, I have not noticed anything that you can, adjust that's in here that will cause the angle of the blade to change, where you can probably correct that 3 to 4 millimeter cut, unless you were to do something like, like aftermarket or whatever. But I have not noticed anything that you can do. So the only suggestion I have walked away with at this point is, if perfection or close to perfection is something that's really important to you, then anything about 1/2 inch and smaller, you can get a really, really nice cut with this machine. But for bigger items, if you just need to cut off like an initial spine and then your intention is to make smaller sizes, then that will work fine. But trying to get a perfect cut into a big stack of papers or books, I am yet to get that perfectly 90-degree cut. And so I'll just wrap this video up there. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. If it's anything that I think I can help with, I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you have suggestions, please leave them as well, because the questions and suggestions over time under these videos have been helpful to myself and also to others as well. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I will talk to you guys in another one. Bye.